It was just after his 20th birthday when Jake found himself in a whirlwind of thoughts. Half of his mind was preoccupied with plans to hang out with his friends, while the other half was fixated on the idea of finding a girl to spend time with. It was during this chaotic period that his mother announced, "Honey, my old friend is coming over." He merely shrugged, thinking, sure, why not? His mother had a revolving door of friends, one after another, like mushrooms sprouting after rain. Most of them were the same, dull, complaining about life, sipping tea in the kitchen, and offering unsolicited advice about raising children. But this time was different. When she walked in, Jake immediately sensed something was off. She looked to be in her early 40s, with a long ponytail that swayed as she moved. But it was her eyes that caught him off guard, deep, dark, and piercing, like something out of a movie. They held a certain intensity, as if she had spent her life observing the mistakes of others and had learned to turn them into opportunities. Her figure was not that of a typical young woman, it was strong and confident. Her hips were curvy, her chest was well-defined, and she carried herself with an air of authority. There are women who don't invite a romantic gaze but are impossible to ignore, and she was one of them. There was a raw power about her that was undeniable. His mother was all smiles, introducing her, "This is Lena. We've been friends since we were young, and we've been through a lot together." Lena smiled back, but her grin had a hint of something else, an unspoken challenge. "I see you, kid." Her gaze lingered on him a moment longer than necessary. His mother, oblivious, busied herself with tea and pastries, while Jake felt a strange flutter in his chest. They settled at the table, and his mother launched into her usual topics, work, neighbors, and rising prices. But Lena suddenly interjected with comments that left Jake speechless. She casually mentioned prison, and how some people had wronged her, all with the ease of someone discussing a trip to the grocery store. He sat there, pretending to be calm, but inside, he was buzzing. Wow, his mother's friend was something else. While his mother was in the kitchen, Lena lit a cigarette by the window and turned to him, saying nonchalantly, "So, you're 20, huh? Still young, but already a man." Jake nearly choked on his tea. She smelled of more than just tobacco, there was a sharp perfume, cheap yet oddly fitting for her character. The mix of smoke, her scent, and her laughter seeped under his skin. He tried to joke it off, saying, "Yeah, 20, but still a fool." She replied, "Fool or not, what matters is that you've got guts. The rest will follow," and laughed. He realized the conversations were going to be anything but boring. She didn't shy away from asking direct questions that most women wouldn't dare pose to someone else's son. "Do you have a girlfriend?" she asked, her eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel like she was more interested in him than in the girl. He found himself intrigued rather than put off by her past. Who else in his life spoke so candidly about life's messiness without pretending everything was perfect? She was real, and while that scared him, it also drew him in. When his mother left for the store, it was just the two of them. Jake sat on the couch, attempting to focus on the TV, while Lena lounged across from him, stretching her legs out. She looked at him as if weighing whether to say something or not. Then she sighed and said, "Don't think I'm some kind of monster. Life's just been tough for me." In that moment, a thought flickered in his mind, what if? But he quickly dismissed it as ridiculous. She was his mother's friend, an older woman whose life experiences seemed vast and daunting. Yet, a voice inside him whispered, "It's not that simple." Little did he know, this was just the beginning. After that evening, Lena stayed longer than he had anticipated. His mother initially said, "Just a couple of days while she sorts things out." But those days turned into weeks. Jake didn't mind, their apartment was spacious enough for everyone, but he could feel the atmosphere shifting. His mother continued her routine, work, gardening, chatting on the phone with friends, completely unaware that someone with a complicated past had taken up residence in their home. Jake noticed every little detail. Lena moved through the house as if it belonged to her. Not arrogantly, but with a quiet confidence. She would stroll into the kitchen in her robe, casually pouring herself a cup of tea, leaving just enough of her figure exposed to make his heart race. It seemed trivial, but when you're a 20-year-old guy and see such a scene unfold in your own home, it sends adrenaline coursing through your veins. She would smoke by the window, the smoke curling into the curtains. His mother would sigh, "Lena, not again." But Lena would just smirk and retort, "Come on, your place is already smoky from the neighbors." Jake watched, fascinated by how she navigated life with such ease, always coming out unscathed. With him, she maintained a different dynamic. At first, her comments were casual, like noticing his athletic build or saying he was maturing right before her eyes. But there was always an underlying message, a hidden meaning in her words that he felt but couldn't quite articulate. It was like a game, and he was starting to enjoy playing. Jake was under the sink, his hands covered in soap and grime, muttering to himself as he tried to fix the leaky faucet. His mother had called him in a panic, insisting that he help her out. Just as he was about to give up, Lena walked in. She settled herself on a stool nearby, watching him with a curious expression. After a moment of silence, she broke it with a teasing remark, "A man should have a golden head and golden hands." Jake nearly bumped his head against the pipes in surprise. She laughed, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Don't take it personally. I'm just saying, your hands look fine." He felt his heart race, caught off guard by her playful tone. When his mother returned, she glanced at them and asked casually, "So, did you fix it?" Jake's heart was pounding as if he were facing an exam. Lena wore an innocent expression, but he could sense the underlying tension. As the days turned into weeks, Jake found himself increasingly preoccupied with thoughts of Lena. He'd sit in class, distracted by memories of her laughter and the way she would lean against the window, smoking a cigarette. He questioned his sanity, wondering why he was drawn to his mother's friend, a woman with a complicated past that he could only imagine. One afternoon, while his mother was out visiting a neighbor, Jake found himself alone with Lena in the kitchen. She was slicing apples, and he wandered in to grab a glass of water. Without looking up, she offered him a piece. "Here, try this. It's sweet." As their fingers brushed, a jolt of electricity shot through him, and he felt the air in the room grow thick. He looked into her eyes, and she smiled softly. Suddenly, the kitchen felt too small, and he mumbled a quick thanks before retreating, his heart racing. Lena was playing a game, he realized, but he wasn't sure of the rules. Sometimes, it felt like she was on the verge of crossing a line, and other times, she would casually discuss mundane topics with his mother, as if nothing was amiss. Jake began to notice a shift in his own behavior. He found himself lingering at home more often, drawn to her presence. He used to rush out to meet friends, but now he craved the simple pleasure of catching her gaze or hearing her voice. At night, he lay awake, wondering if she was aware of the effect she had on him or if he was simply losing his mind. One evening, his mother called to say she would be late from work. "Just make sure you two eat something," she instructed. Jake felt a mix of excitement and anxiety as he realized he would be alone with Lena again. The television droned on in the background, but neither of them paid it any attention. Lena sat at the kitchen table, smoking and cradling a mug of tea. Jake stepped in, his heart racing, knowing this was a pivotal moment. "Sit down," she said, nudging a stool toward him with her foot. "We need to talk." He complied, the air thick with unspoken words. They sat in silence for a minute before she exhaled a cloud of smoke toward the window and asked, "Do you think I'm ugly?" The question caught him off guard. "No," he managed to say, "you're just different." She smirked, a knowing look in her eyes. "Different is putting it mildly. I spent 6 years in prison." "Do you know what that means?" He nodded, unsure of what to say. "It means there are no fairy tales or princes. Just dirt and truth. You either rot away, or you become like me." Jake studied her, realizing there was no self-pity in her words. She spoke matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "Your mother thinks I've changed," she continued, a hint of bitterness in her tone. "But people don't change. We just get used to our own demons." He nodded again, feeling a strong urge to ask her more, to understand everything she had experienced. "You probably hate having me here," she said suddenly. "Why would I?" he replied, genuinely confused. "Because it's normal to feel that way," she said, squinting at him. "Be honest, do you think about me?" Jake choked on his breath, caught off guard by her directness. "I do," he admitted, "but not in the way you might think." She laughed, a light sound that made him blush. "How do you think?" He fumbled for words, feeling like a kid caught in a lie. She watched him with an amused expression, as if she enjoyed his discomfort. "You know," she said finally, "I was 20 once too. I sat with older men, and they always had the same question in their eyes, when?" "And what did you say?" he asked, intrigued. "Sometimes I said never, sometimes too soon," she replied, her gaze steady. "But the scariest part? It's not about what happened to me. It's about living without illusions. You look at someone and you just know they're lying." He fell silent, contemplating her words. "And you?" she pressed, pointing at him. "Are you lying?" He hesitated, feeling the weight of her gaze. "Life will break you," she warned, her tone both ominous and prophetic. "The question is, how hard?" Jake sat there, grappling with the gravity of her words. He thought about leaving, but something held him in place. "You're a smart guy," she said, breaking the tension. "I can see your mother is proud of you, but you're too soft. Soft people get broken first." He opened his mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. Suddenly, she reached over, took a sip from his mug, and set it back down. The gesture felt more intimate than any touch he could imagine. They spent the night talking, her stories revealing a world he had never known, fights for cigarettes, lost friends, promises made and broken. Each tale peeled back layers of her past, leaving him both fascinated and unsettled. Jake sat at the kitchen table, the weight of Lena's words hanging in the air like a thick fog. She had shared stories that peeled back the layers of her life, revealing a world he had never known. He felt as if he were sitting across from someone who had lived 100 lives, each one more complicated than the last. Her laughter, light yet tinged with something deeper, echoed in his mind. As she stood to leave, she turned back and said something that would linger with him long after she was gone. "Never trust anyone completely. Not even me, especially not me." With that, she disappeared into her room, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. He had never smoked a cigarette in his life, but that night, he craved one desperately. The chaos inside him was overwhelming, and he needed something to dull the noise. After that evening, everything changed between them. There was no need for words, an invisible thread seemed to connect them. Whenever he entered the kitchen, she was already there, her gaze burning into him like a brand. Their mother remained blissfully unaware, lost in her own world of work and phone calls, while they played a dangerous game. One afternoon, Jake was hunched over his laptop, struggling with a paper for school when Lena appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a playful smirk. "What's got you so serious?" she teased, her eyes sparkling with mischief. He glanced up, feeling the heat rise to his cheeks. "Just working on this paper," he mumbled, trying to sound nonchalant. She stepped closer, her presence enveloping him. He could feel her breath on his neck as she leaned over his shoulder, her hand brushing against his. "You're too stubborn," she said softly. "Don't be afraid to live." The weight of her words hung in the air, and he found himself frozen, caught in the moment. She lingered for a heartbeat longer before withdrawing, leaving him bewildered. Later that evening, after their mother had gone to bed, Jake ventured into the kitchen for a glass of water. The light was on, and there she was, sitting at the table in a robe, one leg crossed over the other. A long scar ran down her knee, and she caught him staring, a sly smile creeping onto her lips. "Like what you see?" "It's a memory," she said, her tone playful yet serious. "Did it hurt?" he asked, unsure why he felt compelled to know. "Hurt? That's nothing. Pain comes from betrayal," she replied, her eyes darkening for a moment. She pulled her robe up slightly, and Jake felt his heart race. He tried to maintain his composure, but he could feel the heat creeping up his neck. "You're blushing," she noted, a teasing lilt in her voice. "Oh, come on," he protested, trying to brush it off. Her laughter was soft, yet it sent shivers down his spine. She handed him a glass, their fingers brushing together for a moment longer than necessary. The connection felt electric, and he realized she was playing a game he didn't fully understand. The next day, they found themselves washing dishes together. Jake scrubbed while Lena dried, and as she leaned in closer, her shoulder brushed against his. The scent of her cheap, sharp perfume filled the air, and he froze, caught in the moment. "What's scary?" she whispered, her voice low and intimate. He turned to face her, but words escaped him. She was so close he could see every tiny line around her eyes, the fire and challenge in her gaze. "You know this isn't a game," she said softly, and just like that, she pulled back, snapping the towel playfully. "All right, all done. Good job." Jake's heart raced as he stood there, feeling as if he had just sprinted a mile. Nights became the hardest. He lay in bed, tossing and turning, listening to every sound she made in the hallway. When her door creaked open, his throat would dry up, and he felt as if he might burst. He wanted to confess, to spill everything, but her words echoed in his mind, especially "don't trust me." He realized she was leading him to the edge, but the leap had to be his. The tension built until one fateful evening when they found themselves alone in the living room. Their mother had gone out, leaving them in a silence thick with anticipation. Lena turned on some music, the soft notes filling the space between them. She settled onto the couch, stretching her legs out, and then casually remarked, "You know what's the most dangerous thing about a woman?" "What?" Jake asked, his heart pounding. "When she knows you want her, but doesn't give you a yes or a no." Her gaze locked onto his, and he felt paralyzed. It was a confession disguised as casual conversation. Unable to hold back, he asked, "What do you want?" She leaned closer, her warmth radiating toward him, and whispered, "For you to figure it out." Then she pulled back, leaving him reeling. Jake sat in the empty room long after she had retreated, trying to process what had just happened. She had backed him into a corner, leaving him with only one way out, to step forward. But was he ready? Or was this all just a game to see how far she could push him? That night etched itself into his memory, a moment burned into his mind like a brand. The next day, he tried to distract himself, hanging out with friends, playing soccer, and drinking beers on the porch. But the unease inside him wouldn't fade. He knew she was home, and he felt an undeniable pull back to her, like a moth to a flame. Returning late, he found the apartment quiet, the only sound the ticking of the clock in the kitchen. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and all he could see was Lena, how she sat on the couch, how she brought a cigarette to her lips, how she looked straight into his soul. After 20 minutes of restless thoughts, he realized he couldn't stay still any longer. He slipped out into the hallway, careful not to creak the floorboards. The dim yellow light from the kitchen caught his eye, and he paused. There she was, in a long t-shirt, sitting at the table, smoking. An ashtray and a cup of tea sat beside her. She noticed him and didn't seem surprised. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He shrugged, taking a seat across from her. She extinguished her cigarette, her gaze piercing into him, lingering without words until a crooked smile spread across her face. "Well, here we are." Lena leaned back in her chair, a playful smirk dancing on her lips. "What do you mean?" "You were waiting for this," she said calmly. "And I knew you would come out. Guys always do." Jake sat there, speechless, his throat dry and his heart racing as if the neighbors could hear it pounding. She reached for his mug, poured him some tea, and pushed it toward him. "Drink, so your hands don't shake." He took the mug but couldn't bring himself to sip. Suddenly, she reached out, her fingers brushing against his palm, not by accident, but deliberately. Her fingers were warm and strong, adorned with delicate rings. "You know," she said softly, "you're a good guy. Too good, actually. I'd be scared if I were you." "Scared of what?" he wondered. She smiled knowingly, her gaze locked onto his, and his mind buzzed like a plane taking off, no thoughts, just feelings. Just a little more, and they would both lose control. "You started this on purpose," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What?" she interrupted, her laughter light and teasing. "You think I'm messing with you?" "No, I'm just showing you that life can be like this. Without rules." She shifted closer, and he could feel her breath, the warmth of her skin. Inside, a voice screamed, "Stop. Your mom is right there. This isn't right." But his body didn't listen. They sat in silence, the tension thickening the air. Then she leaned in even closer, almost touching, and whispered, "So, are you brave enough to find out?" He froze. Then she pulled back, stood up, took a sip from her mug, and casually said, "Go to bed. Tomorrow will show." He sat there, stunned. "What about you?" he managed to ask. "I'm fine." She smiled knowingly. "I already know everything." With that, she left the kitchen, leaving him alone. He remained there for another 10 minutes, feeling foolish. What had just happened? A test? A challenge? Or was she just as scared to go further? He lay in bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Every cell in his body felt alive. It seemed that if he had taken a step at that moment, everything would have changed, but he didn't. And then he realized that this night would haunt him forever because it didn't matter if anything had happened or not. What mattered was that he had been on the edge. By dawn, he finally drifted off. She appeared in his dreams, laughing, walking down the hallway, calling to him. He woke up in a sweat, his heart racing as if he had run a marathon. And deep inside, one thought lingered: she had won. When he woke up, he felt shattered. His head was heavy, as if he had been drinking all night instead of tossing and turning in bed. He walked into the kitchen, sunlight streaming through the window. His mom was bustling around the stove, and Lena sat at the table, calmly sipping her coffee as if the previous night had never happened. She looked up, met his gaze, and smiled as if they had just been discussing the weather yesterday. The atmosphere in the dimly lit kitchen was thick with tension, palpable enough to cut with a knife. "Good morning, hero," she said, a hint of mockery in her tone. He froze, trying to decipher whether it was a tease or just a joke, but his mom interrupted. "Son, sit down. The eggs are ready." And just like that, the ordinary blanket of routine enveloped them, while he felt a fire raging inside. He sat down and ate in silence. Lena occasionally shot glances his way, each one like a jolt to his nerves. He tried to avoid her eyes, but that only made it worse. It felt like she was playing with him even more. His mom was chatting about the neighbors' complaints, the rising prices, and her boss at work. He listened half-heartedly, his mind elsewhere. She was doing this on purpose, pretending as if nothing had happened. But he knew. And she knew that he knew. At one point, his mom stepped into the other room to grab her phone. Lena leaned in closer and quietly said, "You're doing a good job keeping your cool." He nearly dropped his fork. He wanted to respond, but his mom returned, and everything fell back into its usual rhythm. The day dragged on strangely. His mom took Lena to the market, and they spent time discussing dresses. He hovered nearby, pretending to be busy, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her words at breakfast. What did she mean by keeping his cool? Was it a test, a jab, or an acknowledgement that something had happened between them, even if it was unspoken? That evening, he found himself in the kitchen again. His mom had already gone to bed. Lena poured tea into cups, sliding one toward him. "You've been on edge all day," she remarked. "And what do you think?" he shot back, the words slipping out before he could stop them. She smirked, took a sip, and held his gaze, unblinking. "I think you're taking this too seriously. Sometimes a night is just a night." Then she turned and walked away, leaving him sitting there, his chest tightening. For her, it was just a night, but for him it had turned everything upside down. It was then that he truly began to wonder if she had known all along what she was doing to him, how he was getting caught up in these unsaid words, and how it made her feel lighter and more amused. But regardless, there was no turning back. He was in the game now, and he couldn't exit it on his own. That evening, after her words echoed in his mind, he lay in bed, trying to make sense of what was happening to him. It felt like he was living in someone else's script, where the roles weren't written by him. He was a 20-year-old guy who thought he knew everything about life, only to find himself a pawn in someone else's game. Just a night, she had said. But for him, it was anything but simple. It felt like a blow to the head. It was the first time he understood that adults weren't obligated to play by his rules. He could think he was smart and interesting, that he had it all figured out, but they had experience, their own demons, their own exhaustion, and to them, he was just a chapter, not the whole story. A few days later, she left. His mom saw her off to the bus, and as Jake stood there, watching her go, he felt a strange mix of relief and loss. The game had ended, but the memories lingered, a reminder of the night that had changed everything. As the bus pulled away, Jake stood there, feeling like a piece of furniture, watching Lena toss her bag into the compartment and wave goodbye. There was no secret glance, no pause, no drama. She simply boarded the bus and left, and he was left with an emptiness that felt like a part of him had been ripped away. His mother, standing beside him, turned and said, "She's a good one, isn't she? I'm glad you got to know her." Jake nodded, but inside, he wanted to scream, "Mom, you don't know half of it." He didn't say anything, couldn't. Time passed. At first, he waited for a call, then he stopped, and eventually, he began to forget. But forgetting didn't mean it was over. It meant he had learned to carry the splinter inside him. The strangest part? He didn't feel anger towards her. Yes, he sensed he had been used, that he had been played with. But that anger faded quickly, replaced by a mix of respect and gratitude. She had shown him how the world really worked, no filters, no promises of everything being okay, no fairy tales. She had given him a glimpse into someone else's darkness, and that changed him forever. What was most powerful was that he never quite figured out if it had been seduction or a test. Maybe she just needed to feel alive next to him. Perhaps it was an experiment to see how he would react if she tossed him a bone. Or maybe something about him had genuinely intrigued her. He had no answers, and perhaps he never would. A couple of years later, he found himself laughing about it. He shared stories with friends about a woman he had known, of course, without the details. They were curious, but inside, he thought, guys, if you only knew how she reshaped me. After her, I stopped believing in the fairy tale of happily ever after and pure love. I realized everyone has their shadow, and that shadow is stronger than any pretty words. Maybe that's why he became more cautious. He learned to read between the lines, to see when a woman smiled not because she was happy, but because she had something else in mind. Yet sometimes, he found himself reminiscing about that night, the smell of coffee, the creak of the stool, her steady gaze, as if she knew he would drown and had no intention of saving him. And you know what? He would have drowned again, fully aware, because it was his test. He passed it, even if not with flying colors. Experience doesn't always come neatly packaged. Sometimes it arrives in the form of your mother's friend who had been to prison and was drinking your coffee. Sometimes it comes through pain, unspoken words, and unanswered questions. But those are the stories that make you an adult. Not your passport, not turning 20, not your first diploma, but those encounters that hit you hard and leave a scar. And with that scar, you move on. Recently, he sat with friends at a bar. Each had their own life, one was juggling a mortgage, another was married, and a third was running a business. The conversation turned to pivotal moments. Someone recalled their first fight, another how they were drafted into the army, and someone else how they fell in love and got hurt. Jake remained silent, because his moment was too personal, too strange, too wrong for others' ears. He smiled, nodded, pretended he had ordinary stories, all the while replaying that night, that kitchen, that look in his mind, thinking if it weren't for her, he would be a different person, maybe more naive, maybe happier. Who knows? He married later, started a family. And sometimes, when he argued with his wife, he caught himself hearing her voice in his head, "You take everything too seriously." It was amusing because it still worked, like a cat. He didn't seek her out, didn't Google her, didn't ask his mother. If fate wanted to bring them together again, it would. But honestly, he thought it was better this way. Some people should remain in memory as a haze, as a feeling, rather than a fact. Over the years, he realized something important. She hadn't given him just a night, she had given him a mirror. He saw in it his true self, scared, confused, yet willing to delve deeper, even if it was frightening. That mirror was something he carried with him throughout his life. Was it seduction? Who the hell knows? Maybe it was her way of coping with her past, feeling needed for a moment. Or maybe he truly was a spark for her. But one thing was certain, it was his first adult lesson and the most valuable. Sometimes he thought, what if my kids ever find themselves in a similar situation? Will they be able to handle it? Will they be able to live with that scar? He hoped so because life always finds a way to test us through people, circumstances, and such strange encounters. So if you ask him, do you regret it? He would say, not a bit. Because regrets are for what never happened, and something did happen for him. It was his secret, his lesson, his burden, and his gift, all at once. And sometimes, late at night, when he sipped tea in the kitchen and gazed out the window, he fancied he could hear her footsteps just outside the door. He would even smile because that ghost of the past was not an enemy. It was a reminder. A reminder that he became an adult not when he got his passport, but when a woman with her own hell walked into his life and gifted him a night that no one would ever know about but him. Subscribe to the channel.